Sophie.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you doing on
Doing,
this election day eve?
I will tell you, staff has been working diligently, and we had a slew of volunteers in today.
Oh, good.
Uh, they've done a great job of trying to manage the whole social distancing, masks, piece, and we've just had some amazing, amazing volunteers.
That's nice. I was going to say, hopefully we can keep our power on. For, this
Also,
seems so apropos. It's so apropos to what's going on in the world right now. It's like the wind and the rain and I'm waiting to see thunder and lightning. And we did see snow. Hi, Lori.
Hi, great picture of the Orono voting in the front page of the Bangor Daily News today.
Oh, really? I didn't see it. I get my paper electronically anyway. I don't get to see all the pictures.
Here you go. Let's see.
The Mills delays reopening.
No,
oh yeah, nice. That was at town. That was at the town. Was that at town office?
That's the town office.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Angie Catala's in the back, and that's a college student sitting next to Shelley. The article was about how smoothly it's going, and that Orono has these in-person absentee voting. So
I did see one article with a voter actually at the front office in the office. And I can't remember where I saw that in Orono. Got reporters all over the place.
Well, Shelley and her team and all those volunteers are doing an amazing job. And isn't it that we have was it more people voting or just more absentee voters that we've had before?
we won't know how many voters we're going to have voting until we get through tomorrow. So at this point, we've had a lot more absentee than we would normally have.
But I just can't wait for it to be over. I want the votes to be counted, and I just want to breathe for a second. And you must be excited, Lori. Are you like anticipating
Well, I am, because I set two goals for myself, which was to use the money available from Clean Elections to hire college-age students to encourage them to get out and vote. And despite the fact that they have midterms and all their other challenges, they've been doing a great job. And then my other goal was that Orono's turnout would be higher than we've ever had. And the highest turnout was, well, in the last 20 years, was the Obama 2008 presidential election. That was 5,820 people voted in Orono, and it looks like we're going to surpass. Bell had said that last week, that it looks like we're clearly going to surpass the highest level of voters we've ever had. So
I think it's going to be surpassed everywhere.
Yeah, Trump kind of helped that one.
Yep.
Everybody's
what did you
say? I think with the presidential election, and also I think because we have the Senate seat, which was millions of dollars thrown into that, you knew it was going to be a lot of people showing up to vote on that stuff.
You got it.
So it's been a long effort. I'm very glad that it's going to be over tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep, me too. Or at least by the end of the week. If not tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sophie, are we expecting Cindy tonight or no? Oh, are you muted? Can
you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Lost you.
Nope, we lost you.
Might be a short meeting.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, my system says that you're connected all the time. So if I cut out, you got to let me know.
Will do.
So you ready to begin, Megan?
Yes, I didn't know if Cindy was expected.
Now I can't hear you.
Hello?
Can anybody else hear Megan?
I can hear Megan.
I can hear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Try again.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. I was asking if Cindy was going to be joining us tonight or not. No? Okay. Oh, you're muted again.
Not sure.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's begin. Item number 1, roll call shows that we have Councillor Robertson, Councillor Osher, Councillor Perry, Councillor Grenier, and myself, Councillor Gardner here. Before I jump to item 2, I just want to briefly remind folks that it is Native American Heritage Month. And there are some great resources both at the national level and locally. So if you haven't checked out nativeamericanheritage.gov, there are so many cool things happening, especially because of the pandemic. A lot of these events are going to be webinars, or there's even going to be a film festival later in the month that all of the films will be streamed online. So that's very cool. And then locally, the Multicultural Center is doing a whole bunch of events in partnership with local groups. And so that's worth checking out too. And that's umane.edu/multicultural. So moving along.
Megan, one more thing too is, and this may be part of the Multicultural Center. I just got a flyer from Doug Allen that I sent to Cindy, and they're doing a lot of, they have a lecture series as well that they're doing at the University of Maine, which is on Zoom and also free to the public. So
yes,
looks like a good series.
Yeah, there's a whole schedule of events online to check out that are going on at UMaine and elsewhere. So check it out. Okay, so item number 2, we are here. I don't have my agenda in front of me, but we're here to talk about rental. And I'm going to throw that to Kyle or to Sophie to start. Sophie.
I'm going to start today. So staff is struggling a little bit because I think we've been spending time looking at the components of certain rental activities in our community. And every time we come to council, we seem to be getting a little bit different direction. And what we're doing is creating ordinances that now conflict with one another as we draft things. So as we talked about during the council work plan discussions, what I really would like to do tonight is to take 2 gigantic steps back and think about, in general, how council imagines or desires to regulate rental activity. So I don't want to get into the weeds of how we're going to do each specific things, or specifically what the fire code says about certain types of activity, but rather in general, what is your vision? And I actually have a little presentation to start us out. We have the whole team joining us. They just have turned off their videos, which they could turn them all back on. There we go. They are here to talk with us a little bit. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Yeah, it's not the one I want. So the presentation that I have today is really small because we want to hear from you. The first is I want you to think about regulation as a continuum and think about the fact that if I was going to liken this to anything, I think I would liken it to a fruit salad. We don't have to have a family of apples, but we have to have a family of fruits that go together into a tasty fruit salad, meaning they have to be harmonious and they have to work together. So there is no right place to be on this regulatory continuum. Council has the right to regulate for public health, safety, and welfare. Public welfare can go as far as the aesthetics or the community feel. It can live at public health and safety, which are the general life safety type activities. Or council can say the state has adequately prescribed through life safety and other state laws how we want to regulate. So you could say we don't want to do anything with rentals, which would be turning back what previous councils have done, or you could adopt very stringent rules related to rental regulation. So it's a continuum. The important piece is that where you land in the continuum has to be consistent for all. It might be a little different when you get to ordinance development, but the place that you land in that continuum really needs to fit for all of the types of rental activity. So when we say types of rental activity, we've got single family homes, both occupied by owners and not occupied by owners. We have two family homes. Again, we tend to have a good mix of owner occupied and not owner occupied. And then multifamilies. And what we find is once we get to 3 or more units, they're usually not owner occupied. We also have been talking about rentals in terms of long-term versus short-term. More than 30 days or more, less than 30 days. And what's happened is when you look at this, you're then laying on, we've been talking about Airbnbs. We have the traditional rentals. We have homestays. We have seasonal rentals, which our ordinance doesn't even speak to Airbnbs or seasonal rentals. So we're kind of all over the map. So any questions about kind of the grid?
No.
We're good. All right. So I've created 3 questions that I hope will get council thinking. The first is, does council simply want to know what's happening in the community regarding rentals, or does council want to control it? Does council want us to fall back on state law and existing codes? So should we be mirroring what already exists? Or are you looking to create additional codes, ordinances, rules to address specific items in Orono? Do you want the town to take a proactive or reactive approach to deal with health, safety, and welfare concerns related to rental properties? So I think by answering these items and giving us direction on these items, it will allow us. So can I turn this off at this point? Are you guys good? Okay.
Yep.
So my thought is right now we are addressing rentals with a piece in this ordinance over here and then a piece over here. It's not consistent and it's not intuitive for somebody to be able to go to. We've talked about everything from inspecting all units to letting the market determine what would work with Airbnbs as an example. So if we come back to, do you want to know it that is happening, or do you want to control what is happening? That's a pretty good first question that would really help staff figure out what direction we should go in.
Is there another word we could use besides control?
Wheel? I
like
think
the control word.
So you can use whatever word you'd like. My thought there is, what I'm trying to get at is the difference between a registration process. So essentially you would know it, you could collect data about it, versus a licensing process. So inspections and evaluation of how that particular unit is impacting its neighbors or the community really lends itself not so much to a registration process, but to more of a licensing or occupancy process. So I will tell you, the frustration that staff has at times is when we say we want to simply know, but then people get mad because we can't control what's happening there. So that, I think we need to kind of understand that. And that has been a tension, I think, in our conversations with council as to, is this are we asking people to register just so we know, or do we want more control over, do we want rules that they have to follow?
So one of the things that you mentioned in that slide you had was the state, were the state guidelines enough or rules enough, but I didn't see that attached to the agenda. So could someone summarize what the state guidelines are so that we can answer the question of whether they're enough?
So Lori, I think the state guidelines are going to be all your life safety codes, your building codes. I can't really summarize those. Where the additional would lay in would be more of the behavior codes. For example, do you want, we had talked about specifics like having a property manager that's local. That is not a state code. That would be an US code. Having the rental registration piece, that is an US code. That is not a state code. But by and large, in terms of rentals, we fall back to the state. We have managed to put just enough in about unrelateds living in homes to conflict at times with the state, which I don't know if Kyle wants to talk at all about some of those conflicts between the two that perhaps we want to iron out, or is that too much, Kyle?
I mean, I can touch on, so, I mean, for instance, our ordinance, defines family as, 3 unrelated people in certain zoning districts and 5 unrelated people in zoning districts that allow multifamily units. And that differs with, the fire code where, I mean, Jeff could speak better to exactly what the fire code says, but I believe that, in their case, a family unit would be, where you have 1 unit and then 3 additional people. So there's a difference there. And then when you get beyond that, on the fire side, it becomes a different occupancy, where for us, we just kind of stick with that 3 or 5 unrelated people. So there's kind of a conflict there that makes it a little difficult to interpret sometimes. And it makes it so from the town side, we view something as one thing, and maybe from a different code, it's viewed as something entirely different.
You're saying the state says no more than 5 unrelated people, whereas we say no more than 3?
Nope. I said in zoning districts, on our side, on the town side, it's 3 unrelated people. In districts that don't allow multifamily as a land use, and in zoning districts that do allow multifamily units as a land use, you can have 5 unrelated people. So a dwelling unit in the village commercial can have 5 unrelated people. A dwelling unit in the MDR can only have 3 unrelated people. And the fire side is, I think, different than either of those. So
I think when we talk about the fire side, it's more of a in the weeds administrative process than it might be worthwhile for this conversation tonight. It really gets into how many people live in the occupancy. Is there an allotment for subleasing within the original tenant's agreement? Are we inspecting the building under 1 or 2 family residential, or are we inspecting it as a rooming and lodging, those types of things? And I think, and this is only my perspective, where the council really needs to be, and Sophie, if I'm overstepping, please let me know. I think the council really needs to be at the 30,000 foot level, where they say, in the interest of safety and health, we need to make sure that rental properties are being inspected, or they're following this mandate or that mandate. If there was something like that, as it is right now, from a life safety perspective, if it's a single family home with only 3 people in it, we're not allowed, under the current language, we're not permitted to go in and inspect that building for safety, even though it's a rental, unless we have a complaint. So ideally, if there was some type of overarching language that said, yes, we're going to inspect rental properties because we're concerned about health, welfare, safety, whatever the case may be, that would be an inroad for us through the ordinance to make those things happen. Once you start talking about code at the street level and numbers and that type of stuff, I think it's really going to bog you down in your conversation and where you're going. So I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I put it out there as kind of selling my pitch to it.
Well,
can I chime in this for a minute, Soph? I want to just agree with Jeff, is that I think that if we get into the weeds or get down on that ground level and start talking about the specifics, whether it's 3, 5, 6 or whatever, then it's a long conversation. Whereas really where we need to be talking, where I believe as well that the council needs to be having a conversation is at that 30,000 level, is what's overarching is important, and then we can figure out how to get there.
Sophie, do you have more sort of presentation stuff, or are you looking to transition this into our, okay. Sorry, I interrupted, go ahead.
No, I was agreeing wholeheartedly that
Okay.
I think where I wanted to get here is to try to get to a general consensus. Are we going to regulate every rental transaction? Because that puts it in a different framework than what we've been doing thus far. If we can kind of erase these specific titles that we're used to working with and say, if it's a rental transaction, Kyle, we want to regulate it. Then figure out, are we regulating it by saying we just want to know and we want to collect data? In which case, I can't, if we licensed, there would be an occupancy aspect to it, that if we had somebody that wasn't complying, we would have an ability to come back. Are we, so the first question ultimate for me is, are you guys supportive of regulating all of the types of rental activity? So that would be, would we say that a long-term student rental in a student home is going to get the same space in our ordinance. It might look a little different than somebody who's doing short-term, and I use that homestay, Airbnb type activity.
So
Sophie,
going through, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, can you put the questions back up again? Is that possible?
Of course, of course. Does that work for you, Cheryl?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
So in going through, preparing for this meeting today, I went through all of my old council notebooks from the past 3 years, just kind of scanning through for all, it didn't take that long. It sounds more like more work than it was. But looking at all my notes for whenever we kind of talked about rental properties, and it just seemed like we've been just circling the same issues and not really giving staff a really clear kind of focus. And I know that a lot of times there's like a back and forth between, you know, sometimes the landlords show up and then there's conversation around that and pushback. And so I'm really supportive of this conversation in terms of being able to give staff a clear direction. And I wonder if folks want to, I feel like these are great questions. Question number 2 almost to me guides us in questions 1 and 3. And I guess this would be a good time for folks to weigh in about, you know, are we really trying a hands-off approach and health and safety codes from the state, like that's it? Or are we thinking that we would like to be able to regulate to address issues and concerns specific to Orono? If folks want to start there.
Do you want me to bring these down or do you want to keep them up?
I like to just kind of look at them, and
okay,
that's okay. I can make them smaller on my screen so I can see everyone. You know, just a little.
I appreciate.
A little note.
Thanks, Cheryl, for asking Sophie to put them up. I agree that we've talked about these before, and it's one of the challenges we have with certain renters, and those challenges are because the managers are not managing the property. I remember that conversation where we said, and there were lots of property managers present, where we said we want a local property manager. And in fact, from my understanding, the calls that we get, the houses that are rental properties that are a problem to their neighbors, they tend to be the ones where there's not a local manager. And we had that discussion about local management being within a certain distance. So local wasn't Portland, but it might be Winterport. I don't recall exactly where we came in on how close was close. Certainly Old Town and Bangor, I think we thought would be local. The idea is that we wanted the town to have someone that could be responsive to physically come if we needed them to physically be here. So I guess that means that I'm weighing in, answering Sophie's question of, does the council want to fall back on state law and existing codes or create additional codes or rules? I was in the past, we discussed this, supportive of this additional rule, specifically because it helps us focus on the management issues that we have. Whereas there are so many business people in town that do rent properties and are not, their rental properties are not a significant problem as much as the buildings that are basically somewhat abandoned by the management is not present. So that's, I guess to answer Sophie's question, that's where I weigh in on that one particularly.
I think when we have spent time talking about particular issues with rental property, it's always been in the direction of additional rules to address the local situation. I think of the noise ordinance. I think of the limit on the number of people in a rental unit. So I think we have certainly been moving towards that, more additional rules that reflect the needs of the community. When I look at a specific issue like inspection, I mean, I think philosophically, I would support inspecting all rental properties, but then I wonder, are we physically able to do that without spending a lot more money hiring additional staff? And that, so I don't think you can look at these issues independent without thinking about the ramifications of them. So Sophie, are we able, or Jeff, are we able to inspect all rental property with our current staff?
So from a life safety inspection standpoint, again, it gets back into what the type of occupancy is. So if it's a rental units in a 1 and 2 family dwelling, then it's a very simple inspection of go in, make sure that the people have appropriate windows to get out of their bedrooms, that there are smoke and carbon monoxide alarms in place, and a few other little things that would need to be addressed that are very quick inspections. So, you know, over an 8-hour day, if Rob St. Louis is going out and doing them, I would expect for those type of occupancies, he could probably do 10 or 12 a day without any major issue. So the initial inspections, and we would only inspect once a year. That's the typical cycle, unless we found a problem, and then we would work through a plan. So I guess the short answer is that I believe we do based on, or we can rather, based on the size of the community, what I'm seeing for housing stock. But, and I'll put that caveat on there, that may change depending on growth or changes in the layouts of the buildings, or more people wanting to take on additional tenants or those types of things. I think as it stands right now, we can do that. But again, subject to change depending on whatever the circumstances may be.
And Jeff, when you inspect those big complexes, you don't go in every unit, right?
We actually, when Rob goes up, he goes into every unit. He doesn't go into every living space. So off of each unit, if you will, there are, I forget, 4 or 5 bedrooms. I can't remember how many are off there. So there's one central kitchen and living room. That's our primary focus, is the kitchen and living room, to make sure that smoke detectors, smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms are in place, to make sure that the sprinkler systems haven't been tampered with and the doors are working well. So again, even in those buildings, it's not as intensive as you might think to conduct the inspections. We spend a lot of time following up, writing notices of compliance, working with people and stuff like that. The actual inspection piece itself, for us anyway, on the fire side, isn't as time consuming as you would think.
And I really think that when we talk about inspections, we're really wanting to do life safety inspections. The thought being that the building inspections would come with complaint or with occupancy. The other thing that we could always do to roll this in, if folks are concerned that we might be biting off too much at the beginning, is take and divide the town into thirds and do a third, and start with new occupancy. I mean, there are ways that once we get into it, we can kind of create, which is why I'm looking for kind of, where does council want to get to? Then I can let my staff loose in trying to create the framework to get you there. And what we're having a hard time with right now is not understanding what your goal is.
So folks, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, my goal would be to inspect all rental properties if we're physically able to do it, in terms of the items that Jeff mentioned. The only question I'd have is there any difference in owner-occupied properties?
For our purposes, oh, I'm sorry, sir. For our purposes under life safety, the only difference under owner-occupied would be if you own a building, then regardless of how many people you have in your family, you can have 3 outsiders, is what it's termed. 3 people not in your family that you rent to, before it triggers another level of inspection. So you could have 8 people in your family, bring in 3 additional outsiders.
Wow.
So you have a large number of people in your home. Whereas if that same home was just rented to outsiders, you could only have 3 people in that home.
Yep. Gotcha.
And that's all based off of studies they've done, fire fatalities, reliability of people to get other people who aren't related to them out of their building, and a lot of other things. So I don't know exactly how to justify it. All I know is that's the propaganda we get from the NFPA. So that's the best I can tell you there.
Yep. Thank you. That's good.
I think for question number 3, I think proactive is kind of the direction that we're going in. And my question is, would Airbnbs also, because we don't have anything, would that be a category where we put them on the continuum as well, as far as inspections go?
Yep.
For life safety, any of those fall into that, whether it's Airbnb, regular bread and breakfast, it doesn't matter. If you're open to lodging, then we have language within our books to be able to conduct those inspections with legislation from the council.
Good.
Gary?
Yeah, I'm also in the mindset of us being more proactive to at least inspect these places to make sure that the health and safety is of importance. I want to make sure that we do it in a manner that doesn't overwhelm the staff, but also supports the staff. So, however we get to that, how that would look, we're a unique space. I was kind of looking at, like, when you kind of brought up, Meg, about the state law existing codes or additional codes. I mean, I'm sure the state law existing codes are something based on a town that's just your average town within the state, whereas we're definitely a unique beast based on what's available for rentals. So, I think that we as Tom said, is to be able to be out there and inspect these, being proactive. But I really want to make sure we don't overwhelm the staff and do it in a manner that is able to be done.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Terry, the aspect of, there are the sort of general codes that could apply to any city or town in the state, and then, the ways in which Orono is different. Just to kind of pull back, I mean, I agree with what's been said about the health and safety inspections, and then to kind of pull back a little further, because I think staff would benefit from us having an even more kind of higher altitude conceptual conversation about how we deal with rental properties as a whole. I want to just put in my my thinking, my 2 cents here, in that when I was thinking about this, I was thinking a lot about our conversations around marijuana sales and making sure that we weren't regulating that in a way that was too different from the way that we regulate, for example, alcohol sales in our town. And I think this is very similar for me. I know it's kind of a sticky issue with landlords and property owners in town, but the fact of the matter is that we have a lot of businesses in this town that are licensed and regulated and have a lot of oversight. I know I own one of them. And it's expected. It's expected as part of doing business. And part of the reason why nobody really grumbles about it is because they're used to it, and you're making money off your business, and this is just part of doing business. And I'm thinking of rentals in the same way, whether we're talking about a family that rents the same single family house for 10 years, or whether we're talking about an Airbnb that rents to one guest for one night. I feel like we should have as much conceptual similarity in terms of how we deal with those properties, but with minor tweaks, of course, based on the differences between those properties. So I'm thinking not only about health and safety standards, but also in terms of the way we collect data about properties, registering properties so we know which ones are operating in town, possibly considering limits around numbers of occupants, because we're also thinking about what is the character of a neighborhood, or in a particular zone in town, is it more of a multifamily situation with many apartments, or is it more of a single, so conceptually the things that we do around zoning anyway, I would want to think about how we can kind of make sure that we're looking at these conceptually in a similar way, whether it's a one-night rental or a long-term rental, because I think it's fair. And I just think that also, we do regulate a lot of businesses, not just based on health and safety concerns, but also how they impact the character of our town in the different neighborhoods and communities within our town. So I don't know if folks want to weigh in on that big picture conceptual thing or.
Thank you, Meg. I think the other thing too is the difference between owner occupied and not owner occupied. And I think that takes us into some territory that is sticky sometimes too.
Can you just expound on that a little bit, Cheryl?
I'm thinking back to a conversation that we had before where it was, and I think we talked about Airbnbs being not owner occupied. And then we talked also about rentals as well, not being so for example, a person coming in and buying a home in a neighborhood and they don't live there. They just Airbnb it out, right? And Megan actually reminded me of this when she was talking about the character of a neighborhood. So, so there are some situations that are, that I know are happening in other places. I don't know for a fact if they're happening here in Orono. I don't know if people are buying property and then just renting them out as Airbnbs, but I do know that it's happening in other communities. So I was just thinking about the owner occupied versus the non-owner occupied when it comes to something like that, like a short-term rental.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Cheryl, because I think, again, when I think about sort of the big picture conceptual, like how are we approaching this, I'm sure that it won't be super popular with landlords or property owners who want to get really involved in short-term rentals. But we also do have to think, it hasn't hit our community yet, but in some ways, the student rental situation has already jump-started it for us, where we were talking about affordable housing a few meetings ago. And, I don't believe in over-regulation. I'm not saying we should be down there with a microscope on every single property, but I think it is, personally, I believe that it's our responsibility to balance the desire of property owners to make money off of their property with the fact that, as pointed out by our comp plan, we have a serious lack of affordable rental units, particularly for age categories of 65 and up for people who are on the poorer end of the spectrum. What is the guideline? 80% of the median income for that county, I think, is how right? So 65 and up, we have a lack of rental units available in the right price range for those folks. And also the 25 to 64 age range with a family of 3 or more people in it. We have hundreds of units, according to the comp plan, that we should have for that population. We don't have a good workforce housing. So in order to try to encourage more affordable rental units in this town, we have to make sure that the student pricing doesn't price folks out and that the Airbnb pricing doesn't price folks out. So although I'm not an advocate for over-regulating, I do think that it's a necessary job of a council to balance that and make sure that one side of the market isn't pushing folks out of being able to live here.
May I comment on that? Megan, I appreciate you making those comments. I would say from the economics of the town, we're having that's occurring already here in town, and so understand that you for a longest time we would hear from folks that says we can't. there's not really affordable housing for a family here because the owner can make it into a student rental, and they can and they can make a lot more per month renting it to 4 or 5 students in those areas where it's allowed, as opposed to having a single family living there. And so that there continues to be that that struggle to try to balance that market. Now, on top of that, within the last 2 years, maybe 3 years, you've started seeing the increase in the, and I'm using Airbnb as a generic term, so I apologize that up front for that. But what's happening is that now we're seeing rental properties that are being converted into Airbnbs because now they're finding that they can make more money spending, with a weekend stay and turning it over on a nightly basis than even on the student rental. So you're seeing that challenge in Orono as we speak today. So that is an issue that you should be looking at. And like I said, I commend you for bringing that point up. It certainly is happening. The last we checked, we had like 88 properties in Orono listed for Airbnb type businesses.
And were these not non-owner occupied businesses?
Some of them we haven't done enough study to know the answer to that. But I will say that I know anecdotally that there's been several times we've been contacted by folks who have said we're interested in buying this property, and we want to know whether short stays can happen because that's what we intend to do to it, and it's not owner occupied. So I will say that it's happening on an irregular basis at the very least.
So I guess one question I would have is, do we want to regulate the owner occupied versus the non-owner occupied, or do we want to regulate for the behavior that we most commonly see in owner occupied, meaning to talk more about the impact as opposed to the setup? Kyle, can you kind of?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the difference between owner occupied and non-owner occupied, I mean, we currently have what our homestay is, for instance, allows owner occupied short-term rentals, and non-owner occupied short-term rentals aren't allowed at all according to our current ordinance. But as Dave said, we know that they're happening at some level. But I mean, many of those, exist, and, we don't even know that they're a thing. It's not necessarily that owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. More issues may present themselves in some cases, but in others, they may not. For instance, a single family home, a whole single family home being rented on a short-term basis that's non-owner occupied might not generate a lot of concerns, but a multi-family structure, like Sophie was saying, looking at the impact of, what the use actually is, where you have 5 units and they're all, turning over on a nightly basis. Well, then you're getting closer to a hotel than you are a residential structure. It doesn't really fit in with the area quite as much. So yeah, I mean, I think that owner versus non-owner occupied is one way that you can look at it, but it's not the only way, and it's not necessarily that all non-owner occupied properties are inherently going to generate problems. So there could be other metrics to look at as well. And when we talk about things like parking or number of people, those could be issues whether it's owner occupied or non-owner occupied.
It might be nice for an opportunity to bring in the other apple in our salad, Josh, to hear how he sees owner occupied versus non-owner occupied. So just a thought.
Thanks, Dave, for dragging me into this. I will tell you that typically owner occupied we don't have to deal with, but I've also seen, and this is years ago, but we would have had what you would call slumlords, and they didn't really much care what the quality of their apartments were as long as they were getting their money. So I don't think that we should be drawing any sort of lines between owner occupied or not owner occupied. I think everybody should be treated exactly the same and should be inspected to the same degree.
So, Josh, thank you for saying that, because I'm in that same camp. I also feel like what you said, Meg, about the regulation side of it. I think it's a necessity. I think that, like anybody, including myself, who have businesses, there are rules. And I think the Airbnb took off in a sense that it was a free for all. Really, in essence, they're businesses. Either way you want to look at it, they are a form of a business that I believe that we should be at least putting some form of regulation on that. So yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, I think I'm more concerned about the impact of different rental units in different neighborhoods, as opposed to whether it's owner occupied or not owner occupied. I think sometimes the owner occupancy clause can encourage good behavior or particular kinds of behavior, but I think that it's something to be used very sparingly, because I think you can get into some trouble with whether you're discriminating against people who don't, who are not, if it's not owner occupied. But in general, I mean, I'm really thinking about how does a rental property impact a neighborhood or an area of town or the town as a whole when I'm thinking about these issues.
My thought is the property does not impact the town. It's the behavior of the people in it. And right. So I'm with our police chief that says that we should just have standards of, if we've gone beyond just the life safety that the state has and we make additional regulations to address issues or concerns, the issues and concerns are both the behavior of the people in the properties and the management of those properties that may, as they deteriorate, then end up impacting the health and safety of the people around them. So by having regular inspections of places that rent, whether they're owner occupied or not, because it could be that someone's owner occupied and then they're renting, and they, as we were just told, you could rent up to 3 people that are not related to you, because they are having various challenges. And those challenges, maybe they, just because they own the property doesn't mean they have the ability to focus on the things that we are concerned about.
Yep.
So, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like council would be generally supportive of the idea of creating a framework of regulation for rentals, period, and allowing staff to create the different categories that may need to exist. You're looking at a proactive approach. Mm-hmm. So that would include inspection. So staff needs to look at how they can reasonably inspect everything. Understanding that if we follow this is only for life safety, and if we follow that, there will be a different level of inspection depending on how the fire code rates the risk, right?
Yep.
So what about the difference between licensing and registering? So do we just want to know that they exist? And oh, by the way, here are the inspections. Or Are we expecting people to bring it up to code and issuing a license as part of that? And then if they don't meet code, if we get complaints, if that one of the things that would be on the docket as a tool, an arrow in your quiver would be to pull a license.
So I'd be interested to just very briefly hear from you, Sophie, or from one of your accomplished department heads, just a tiny little bit about the kind of licensing that we do on other forms of business that operate in Orono.
Sure. So I would invite people to chime in as they want. Right now, we license anybody who is going to serve alcohol gets a component of their licensing includes municipal feedback. So we do inspections and council signs off on those. Anybody who's going to prepare food in Orono has to have a vitulers license, which has the same kind of inspection and council signing off on that. I believe there are way too many rental properties for council to sign off on every one of them. Rather, I would think that a recommendation to pull a license or condition a license would go to council as the stopgap if you wanted to do that. So right now, businesses are charged with getting a business license from the town. But that is simply a registration with the clerk. We're going to come to you when our plate settles down a little bit with a request to change the way we do that. Because right now they register once and they're done. And so I really couldn't tell you, I could not give you an accurate listing of who does business in Orono right now. So that is not a rental registration issue. But that is to say that in many towns, businesses get licensed to do business on an annual basis.
Sophie, are you aware of any communities where rental properties get licensed?
There are some, Tom. There were conversations about that. Orono, I think, kind of led the state, or was one of the leaders in the state when we adopted the rental registration. That was a fallback. You guys had some conversation about licensing, but I know that as part of that work, Evan identified many communities across the country that license rental properties. You're seeing it more now with the adoption of the short-term, kind of the Airbnb. And I know that Kyle and Dave have both attended some MMA trainings about that. So I don't know if you have more information about the licensing of rentals, folks.
Yeah, I will begin. Is that, again, Kyle and I have done similar to the marijuana laws. We've kind of gone around to see what other communities have been doing, as well as attending MMA training. And I would say that Sophie is right on point as always, is that the short-term rentals are much more likely to be licensed, specifically along the coastal communities. I would say there's probably more that are licensing than not when it comes to short-term. I'm not aware of any, Kyle may be, but I'm not aware of any long-term that are licensed. Because again, it typically is the reasoning for licensing over registering is that the licensing has more teeth to act as a deterrent to negative behavior. And that's more likely to happen in the short-term rentals than the long-term. Kyle, I'll let you.
Yeah, I'd agree with most of that. I mean, I haven't looked too much into the idea of licensing for long-term rentals yet, but I know, yeah, on the short-term side, we saw a number of communities in Maine start to implement licensing or land use regulation for short-term rentals to a varying degree, kind of like what Sophie was talking about at the beginning. Some, depending on the community and their kind of specific needs, anywhere from limiting the number and the days that they can operate in a year or in the community to, simply kind of just allowing as many as there are, but requiring that they obtain that license up front and go through an inspection process. So yeah, I mean, I think the framework is certainly there on the short-term side for us to look at, and that was sort of what we started to do in the past. But yeah, tying that into the bigger rental conversation here and the kind of unique qualities of our community could be worthwhile.
I would wonder how you would license a person who owns more than one building in Orono. Like you wouldn't license every building, but just the owner.
I think we would license every parcel, not necessarily every building, but every parcel. So we've got some large multifamily complexes, but they're on one parcel. Then you've got somebody like KC Management that has multiple or cross. I would each one of their discrete parcels, which is what we do now. We register each parcel. They tally up the number of dwelling units, and their payment is based on the number of dwelling units.
But that's a registration, not a license,
yep.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. But
no, go ahead. What I'm hearing is the advantage of the license is really as an enforcement tool. Is that what I hear?
I think so. Yeah. I also think that if somebody has to have a license to have the ability to occupy and do the activity, they're going to be more apt to want to work with us to get an inspection done. They're going to be more apt, I think, to address the issues. Because right now, you can register and have a ton of code issues outstanding, not necessarily allow us in for an inspection. And we're dealing with that on a much different basis.
So as a property owner, if I were a property owner of rental property, I could prevent you from coming in to inspect my property?
Without a complaint, right, Chief?
Well, it depends on the type of property. So if it's the rooming and lodging like we were talking about before, or if it was a recognized apartment building with 3 or more units, then we do have a right to go in and inspect those buildings. Okay. And if you refuse us, we'd certainly try to work with you. But if ultimately you refused us, what would happen is we would go forward for an administrative search warrant from the courts and access the building that way.
That's what I thought was the case. Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of those differences, in the analogy that I brought up earlier about wanting to conceptually treat businesses in a similar way, but know that there are slight adjustments that need to be made based on the specific nature of each kind of business. For me, I would not be against exploring licensing for short-term rentals, simply because, even just listening to the example that Councillor Perry was kind of working through, when you have a long-term renter, if there were issues going on within the house, and you're more likely to have the renters themselves complain, or if the stakes are different when you have someone that is going to be living in the house for a year, whereas the short-term rentals, a person is in and out. So the behavior of the guest, you know, that guest doesn't care, they're gone the next day. So having an enforcement tool in that scenario to me seems perhaps more necessary than for a long-term rental.
Mm-hmm. Sounds reasonable.
So I guess I would ask staff, do you, Kyle, this is, you're kind of running this show. Do you have a framework from which you think you could start?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, what I've kind of been hearing is that, you know, I mean, we want to look at kind of rentals as a whole. And I mean, so one of the things, you know, if we currently look at our ordinance, things are kind of scattered all over the place. You have long-term rentals in one place, short-term rentals sort of in another place, but then not identified in one way, but not regulated at all. And so kind of creating you know, a single place where all of that information is located, and then creating, you know, kind of a general inspection or licensing process, but also acknowledging that certain types are more unique and might have certain issues that other types might not have. So leaving room for kind of certain specific standards for certain types to be, you know, more regulated than, you know, your single family long-term, you know, rentals would be or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think in general, I at least have the information I would need for the framework. You know, I mean, we're not getting into the specifics here. I think that would be a future conversation, but I think this is a good starting point.
Is there anything else that counselors think that we should know before we begin our general framework? We'll pass this off to Kyle, would be the next step to kind of wrangle the troops and create kind of those pathways that you see where he starts out, like kind of like with the highway, with the basic information kind of laid out and ask questions, and then we'll kind of get into more detail each time, I think. My goal though is to try to keep us heading, if we're going to use the highway analogy, like we're either going to go north or we're going to go south. We're not going to just keep going back and forth between Old Town and Bangor.
Yep.
If that's possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would say is that if there are folks out there who are thinking like, well, I don't know, it seems like it's been working, I guess, or why is council bothering with this? I just, you know, in reviewing the comp plan recently, was struck by the note that back as of 2010 census, Orono's real estate rental sector cumulatively constitutes one of the largest parts of the town's tax base. And it seems kind of strange that I mean, one of the biggest economic drivers of our, you know, of our budget is something that we're kind of, it's all over the place and it maybe needs a little attention. So if you feel like you have everything you need, folks, should we move to a brief town manager's update?
Sure, I love to give updates. We are in full election mode here. The field house will be open for voting from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow. It's going to be a cold day tomorrow, so if people are coming to the polls, we would ask folks to please dress warm, and be prepared to wait in line. We can only have 50 people on the voting floor at a time, and that sounds like a lot, but it really is not. So the other thing is that elections and being at the polls on election day. It's one of my favorite days because it's a very social event in Orono, and you see people that maybe you haven't seen in a long time. We're going to ask people to not be social, to be very antisocial at the polls. Come in, do what you need to do, and then we're going to ask you to leave so that we can get more people in.
And so people must wear a mask when they come into the polling place. Is that correct?
They must wear a mask. If people have,
and they should make sure that they're not wearing a mask that has a political message on it.
Oh, absolutely not. And it can't endorse any candidate or anything that's on the ballot. If people have absentee ballots and they don't want to fight through the crowds to get to the polling location, they can still drop them in the ballot drop box, the black ballot drop box outside of Town Hall, right up until 8 p.m. At 8 o'clock, we will pull ballots out for the last time. They will be taken by an election official up to the voting location, and they'll be voted at that point. So if you come by at 8:05, your ballot is not going to be going up to the polling location. It is just as if you were standing in line. But we will have people here. Town Hall, because of the significant staff needs, resource needs on campus, Town Hall is actually, town office is not open for business tomorrow. If you need something and you call the general town manager's number, 889-6900, you can get assistance that way. And then the day after the election, since we've pretty much ripped all of every downstairs, Shelley's office is really a mess. We're going to not be open again on Wednesday. We'll open back up on Thursday for the public by appointment. So yeah, the election is really big news. The other big news is that the governor has made some alterations to what is allowed in terms of gatherings and where people can come from without quarantining or testing. We have been told to probably expect some more of that coming in the coming weeks, that we are really trying to be proactive. And we continue talking with folks up on campus. Last week, I reported about COVID testing and wastewater. This week, late last week, we learned that they took another test and we had come back down to a statistically negative number. So that was really good to see. And we have reached out through the Maine Emergency Management Agency to request that the university continue to take those tests for us. So we will continue to do that without having to try to get a contract through University of Maine Systems Office, which is always a good thing. I think we had, I don't know if people saw the Boo Box deliveries, but those were quite a hit. And Megan, Mazzilla, Mitch, firefighters, police officers, they did an amazing job. Dave and his crew, they came in on Saturday and delivered to get into the spirit. So community development was all over it.
I can report firsthand that there was much anticipation for days leading up to the delivery of the Boo Box. And when a fire truck rolled up in front of our house, Ella lost her mind. She thought that was the coolest thing ever. So, you know, she still got to wear a costume, and she got to get candy, and she got to see a fire truck in front of her house for not scary reasons. So it was a win-win-win. So good, great job, everybody.
So that's the thing, is some people just got stuck with my Santa Fe, and let some people down. So as soon as I get out of election mode, we'll be able to turn our attention and have a little bit more to talk about. On Thursday, we do have a brief, what I hope will be a brief finance committee report. We're finalizing the agenda there. But otherwise, I think we're looking pretty good so far.
Good.
All right. Well, then I will take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Yes.
Everybody in favor, wave goodbye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well.